All righty, welcome back. We are here for another Mr. Evans session of Math Problem of the Week Challenge. I have a nice studio audience with me here today, and they're going to help us walk through this problem today. So let's go ahead and get started by doing what in our first step framework?
Read the entire problem.
Oh, yes, and I think Mr. Evans misspoke. I said first step framework. It's our six-step framework. So this is the first step is to read the entire problem. So here we go. Mario drove 3 hours before stopping for lunch. After lunch, he drove 238 miles on Interstate 90 and 127 miles on Route 13. If Mario drove 512 miles altogether, how many miles did he drive before lunch? Okay, so we have a curious factor here. So let's move on to what our second step would have us to do.
Who or what is the problem about?
You sure? The second step of the six-step framework? Yes, I want to rewrite the question as a statement. So I'm looking at this question and it says, if Mario drove 512 miles altogether, how many miles did he drive before lunch? I'm going to say Mario drove blank miles before lunch. And there we have it. All right, let's get going. And now it's time to move on to my next step in that six-step framework. What is it?
Who or what is the problem about?
All right, so the problem is clearly about Mario, and it's related to Mario's driving. Okay? And now Mr. Evans is going to draw his infamous what?
Tape line.
Yes, that tape line. Many of you know of it by now. So the tape line I'm drawing, and now that I got my tape line set up, now it's time for me to move on to my fourth step in the six-step framework.
Draw your model.
So now as I'm thinking about contemplating and drawing my model, I have to go back up here to make sense of what this was talking about up here to draw my model off of. So if Mario drove for 3 hours before stopping for lunch. So I know he drove a total of 3 hours before stopping for lunch. Then it's after lunch, he drove 238 miles on Interstate 90. Okay, so he must have drove some before lunch, and then he drove some after lunch. And it seems like we're looking for how much he drove before lunch. And he did 238 miles on Interstate 90 and 127 miles on Route 13. If Mario drove 512 miles altogether, how many miles did he drive before lunch? Now it's time to go ahead and draw that out. Let's go ahead and get our bar that's obviously going to be unknown to us right now of what he drove before lunch. Right now, that's our mystery. And because it's our mystery, Mr. Evans, we're going to go with a variable, and we're going to call that variable X. It's what's unknown at the moment. But we do know right after lunch, he drove 238 miles. And this was on Route or Interstate 90. So I'm going to put I-90 to represent Interstate 90. Many of you that drive around and ride with your parents throughout the city of Independence in Kansas City, you've been on some of these interstates and you see I- in the number. Now let's go to what he did after Interstate 90. He went 127 miles on Route 13. So I'm going to draw another rectangular shape to represent the distance for Route 13. All right, and then we know that he drove 512 miles altogether. So all of this equals up to 512. So if I'm looking at that equation, I have X plus 238 plus 127 is the same as 512. And so now I'm in a circumstance where I'm just trying to figure out what X is going to be. And kind of like last week, I'm going to solve these two numbers I do know here first. And Mr. Evans, as you know, I like to solve my problems from left to right. I see that I have 200, 100 here. That's 300. This would be 300. Then I got 30 and 20, which would be 50. But I see I got 8 and 7, which makes 15. So my 50 becomes 60. So I'm going to go 365. Anybody in my audience disagree? We're good to go then. The audience says Mr. Evans is on pace. So we're going to say x plus 365 is the same as 512. And like last week, I told you guys, I want to isolate the x to be on its own. I want to move this from here and move it over there. But the only way to get rid of this 365 is if I take away 365 here. So whatever I do on this side, I have to do on this side as well. So if I take 365 from over here, I have to also take 365 away from over here. So then I'm left with just purely x and whatever that's going to equal. So to find out what that's going to equal, I got to do some standard algorithm subtraction here. And I'm looking at that and I see 5 and 2. Can I take 5 away from 2, class? Yes, actually I could. I'm going to end up with what we call a negative number. But in the terms of the standard algorithm, it's not going to be fair in helping me find my answer. So I got to go do some regrouping. So Mr. Evans is going to cross out that 2 and go next door to the tens place and borrow from that 10, which is now going to make it be left with nothing, and pull that over to that 12, to that 2, which makes it now a 12. All right, which would essentially be 120 if we want to be technical. But we have 12 minus 5, which is going to give us what? 7. I love my audience. They are so with me today. And then I look here and I got a 0 there. And I'm like, man, okay. Can I take 6 away from 0? Yes. But in the terms of what I'm doing with the standard algorithm, something I want to avoid. So I want to make sure that I go next door and borrow again. And that 500 now goes down to 400. And that 100 jumps over to the tens place. And now I have what we call a 10 there. But really, it's a value of 100. So we have 100 minus 60, which gives us 40. That's wonderful. I love how they're with me. And then, of course, I can still do this. 300 taken away from 400. I'm going to be left with what, class? 100. So we have 147. So therefore, x should equal 147. So many of you caught on by now. I've already done step number 5, and that was what, class?
Solve your equation.
And now to make sure that my answer makes sense, I'm going to do step number 6. And what is that, class?
Check your answer.
All right, so in order to check my answer, I'm going to go over here and plug x into a system that should lead me to get 512. And like we said, we knew that 238 plus 127 gave us 365. So if Mr. Evans has done this correctly, when I come over here and I do 365 and I add 147, I should get 512. And that's how I'm going to know if my answer is truly correct. So class, 7 plus 5 gives me what? 12. I have that 2. I carry that 10 over to the tens place. So now I have 10, 60, and 40. 10 and 60 gives me what? 70. 70 and 40 gives me what?
110.
110. So I'm going to put that 1 in the tens place here, and I'm going to carry that 100 over to the hundreds place. And now I have 100 plus 300 plus 100. So 100 plus 300 gives me 400, and then 400 plus 100 gives me
500.
And look at that. I got what I was looking for in 512. So therefore, x equaling 147 is a go. I plug it into my initial statement to start to let everyone know I knew what I was doing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you guys have been great. Let's give ourselves a round of applause for today's math challenge. We will see you next time and next week. Thank you.
First grade field trip first.